Hello, my friends. We're at the Museum of Porcelain in the town of Dehua. By Russian standards, this is a town, but it's actually a county centre of Zhejiang. There's a big statue here that dominates all over this vast square near the Museum of Ceramics. This is the renowned He Chaozong, the local saint of porcelain. Every tea or ceramic region of China, including Dehua, has its own local hero. Here I would say it is Lu Yu, who was an artisan and sculptor in the Ming Dynasty. He became famous mostly because he was the first person who manufactured the statue of Bodhisattva Guanyin, of such high artistic merit that it brought glory not only to him but to the whole town. And artisans started imitating his works. And since then, porcelain art was born in the town of Dehua. As you can see, the statue is quite colossal, and his contribution is actually very valuable. He's known by nearly all the town. Directly behind him, the Municipal Museum of Dehua is located. It's not related to ceramics. It's more about the economy of the town, and we won't go there. We're interested in the museum, which is over there. This is the special museum, Taoqi Baoguan, the Museum of Ceramics. At the square near the museum, there are very lovely sculptures. There are many statues representing all the stages of ceramics production. The traditional stages of production, not modern techniques, but how it looked during the Qing and Ming dynasties. It's exhaustively presented how the raw material was obtained, how ceramicists and sculptors worked, how the pieces were fired, and how the kilns looked. I like this park a lot, it's pretty. And after all, this is a place for entertainment for citizens. It's not just a park, but a park next to a museum. Local people come here in buses and bring their children. It's a very pleasurable sight. The pagoda and everything here was built quite recently. This statue was installed in 2012. And the museum is on a symbolic site, a hill towering above the town. And thanks to this place we get a nice view all over Dehua. Now we'll have a tour of the museum and have a look around. Indeed, it was a strange story that we were filming twice and the material vanished both times, so we decided to do it again better. At the entrance to the museum is this huge piece, made in the style of thin flowers, that have been manufactured for a very long time in Dehua. They are one of the highlights of the porcelain artisans of Dehua, apart from white porcelain and the Bodhisattva Guanyin, which is very well known here. They make such flowers. They were especially popular between the 19th and the beginning of the 21st century, but now the mastery is decreasing and the demand for such artistry. But it's still the calling card of Dehua. 13 kinds of kaolin clay were used here, and a few different masters worked on it. And the entire composition, with the exception of the wooden pedestal, is fully made of porcelain. Even this wreath on top and all the flowers. This is the largest piece in this style. I carefully checked it. The tips of the petals are often broken off, and even when purchasing some pieces there are sometimes tiny defects. This time I was looking for very long, but I didn't notice anything like that. It was fired, by the way, at a temperature higher than 1,300 degrees. So this is a fantasy of ceramic art. The exhibition starts, as it's customary, with the history of ceramics in Dehua. Dehua is one of the 3 largest porcelain centres in China, and accordingly the history of ceramics here goes back deep into the centuries. The first excavations date back to the Neolithic age, but unfortunately very few unbroken ancient ware remain. At this exposition there's partly whole ones, partly restored, rebuilt crocks, workpieces of the Tang Dynasty. This exhibit was uncovered when excavating an old kiln. It has diverse fragments, shards of broken pottery, and the parts of containers for firing. This is from the Song Dynasty. There's also a reconstructed image of a modern restored kiln, In this area, kilns were similar to dragon kilns that are popular in northern Fujian and Yixing. They had some other features, but the principle is the same. The kiln was constructed on a hill. It had an elongated shape. The pottery was fired by the method of many days' wood firing, and the wood was constantly supplied all along the side of the kiln through furnaces. Whole kilns like this did not survive, but after excavation there are restored kilns. This small stand is devoted to the earliest articles. These are pieces of the Upper Paleolithic. They're mostly some crock fragments. Maybe they were pots or vases, pots more likely. A ceramic scrapper and a number of fragments from the Shan and Zhou dynasty. Such a small stand. There's very few pieces left like this. Here are some different types of tools, the remains of kilns. Over there, lots of different moulds in which the ware was fired. Some baked and unsuccessfully baked products that were thrown away right there and then. The bricks that were used to support the pieces inside the kilns. And other tools related to the pottery. This is a very interesting stand too, with different moulds that we see now at contemporary plants also. Previously they were certainly more primitive. These are the beads of porcelain, the statues of Guanyin, some moulds of fish, teapot spouts, lots of various moulds from the Ming dynasty. Several ones are older, but there's not so many ancient pieces. Tools for working with ceramics. But this is a reconstruction because wooden scrappers did not survive, or they're not shown here. And the potter's wheel, the model of an old potter's wheel. During the Song and Yang dynasties, Dehua became a significant center of ceramic production. Quite primitive ware was manufactured in that time, generally for everyday use. Some cups, vases and teapots. Very much shapes were obviously exported to Middle Asia, to the Arab countries, because the teapots are typical Arab style. They were delivered to the port Quanzhou from here because Dehua is not located far from Quanzhou. In that time, Quanzhou was one of the largest ports in the entire Asia, not just China. They were well known because of the low price and large volume of production. And they filled up ships delivered to them by the so-called Maritime Silk Road. The ware was also delivered through the Middle East to Europe, but also to Middle Asia too. There are 2 halls dedicated to these pieces, but in fact they're quite mundane. There are some attempts at decoration sometimes. The shapes are quite crude, little craftsmanship. These are the limitations of the techniques of northern Fujian, the so-called tu hao, rabbit's tail, rabbit's fur. These are the famous cups of Song. They were mostly made in the north of Fujian, with white porcelain, and form the main features of the successive developments of ceramic art in Dehua. Prosperity and fame was brought to Dehua in the Ming dynasty, owing to the master that I was already talking about, He Chaozong, statue of whom stands at the entrance to the museum. He Chaozong, Zhang Sushan, Cheng Wei and Lin Kaojing. These 4 masters were the most renowned sculptors of that time, and they discovered and started reviving the widely known white porcelain from Dehua, which is like white snow, shining, beautiful. The art of glazing and the artistic level also increased, as well as the quality of the processing material. The sculptors started working with porcelain, drawing from the long experience of artisans working with wood. It was during that period that they started making teaware, as well as the statues of Guanyin. Here are 5 pieces from the Ming Dynasty, and they are genuine, really ancient porcelain works. Some of them are cracked and reconstructed. Nevertheless, they are whole. And some early attempts at coloured painting, polychrome. Of course, the more major developments of painting, like Falankai and Fengkai, were already in Jingzhen town. But in Dehua there were various techniques tested. And during the Ming Dynasty there was a powerful evolutionary leap. And here there are 2 famous originals of the master He Chaozong. As I understand, this is the prize of the museum collection, because He Chaozong is a local god of porcelain. This is the image of a Taoist saint, and this is Guanyin. And this particular Guanyin is a donation of a local art collector. There's a lot of such donations in this hall. Pieces from the Ming Dynasty that are not cheap at all. But I like this tradition to make very valuable donations to museums, a contribution to the indigenous cultural heritage. The hall is dedicated to the Qin dynasty, which succeeded the Ming dynasty, somewhere between the boundary between the late Ming and the early Qin. White porcelain was successively pushed out by cobalt painting, white-blue, which is familiar to many people as Jingdezhen painting. Actually, it existed in Dehua too, but in Dehua there was no fine art school and very subtle painting, and even if it existed it was presented by individual works. Dehua was always renowned for mass production of products that were exported through the maritime Silk Road to Asia, Africa, and even reached Europe certainly. That's why more simple pieces were produced, more usable for everyday needs. The big plates, vases, and maybe some pots for cooking, and multiple varied otherware. This one is one of the rare cases that are similar to Jingdezhen style. The similar polychrome 9 dragons vase, the classic painting. But if we look at the Jingdezhen painting of the same period, it seems more subtle to me. And this is a reconstruction of a horizontal kiln, a kiln of the Qin dynasty. During the Song, Yuan, and earlier, the kilns were built on hills. Types of dragon kiln, snake kiln in Taiwan, with the principle that the smoke rises. Later there were big horizontal kilns with pipes set up. They mostly had a bigger capacity, but were smaller in size. Not like the whole village was firing in one place. There were small kilns constructed of a more simple shape, but with a larger capacity in them. In these the renowned blue-white porcelain was fired. A certain master, Cheng Zipeng, I'll pronounce his name deliberately, so he becomes known to us, gifted to the museum this exposition, the underwater excavation of porcelain from the Qin dynasty, when a whole ship with this porcelain was raised. The load was destined for Europe, but the craft ran into a gale and sunk, and as we see the ware was perfectly preserved at the bottom of the sea. And this is the next underwater excavation. Here's the pictures showing how it was carried out. These are the divers marking out the territory. This is them on the deck of the vessel laying out their findings. And here is an exposition of these findings. In this case they refer to the vessel that sunk during the Song Dynasty. Here you can see the vases, you can see these divers' boxes that we already saw in the hall devoted to the Song Dynasty. These particular products are interesting due to the fact that they were raised from the seabed. And we come back to the dynasties Song and Yuan again. This hall is dedicated to underwater excavation. You can see this excellent map of porcelain pieces that were delivered from the port of Quanzhou by sea, almost over the whole world that was known at that time. That is modern India, the whole Southeast Asia including Indonesia and the Philippines, Japan, of course, and Korea, and Eastern Africa, Persia and Saudi Arabia. I suppose the ware started reaching Europe because the line politely ends at the Suez Canal. But I guess that it started reaching Europe in those times. And there is a pair of vessels, evidently the reconstruction of those years, in which this ware was transferred. The state of the vessels and their suitability to severe weather conditions of the Pacific region and Indian Ocean were not their strong point. Therefore, a great deal of ships suffered in gales in some way, crashed, and many were shipwrecked and sank with all the cargo. But luckily, ceramics are not influenced by water. That's why the entire period remains preserved. The ships that sank had a wide range of loads that endured for some time. They found a huge vessel with vases from the Qin dynasty, for example, or snuff boxes, cups and pots of the Song Dynasty, which is very precious indeed. We can see that the ships were moving generally along the coastline, so it's not very hard to find these wrecks. That's why the business of underwater excavation of these treasures continues, because despite the fact that in the Song Dynasty this was very inexpensive ware, nowadays every cup from the Song Dynasty is quite a costly article, regardless of the fact that it is very simple and plain. And this small stand is dedicated to the art of the transition period, when the Qin dynasty was toppled and destroyed, when China was torn apart by different imperialists. It was divided between Russia, Great Britain and Japan. This was a very rough period in Chinese history up to World War II. Many other misfortunes were also endured. Here we can see a caption, "The Republic of China, Minguo." This is the turn of the 20th century, its first half. And often if you hang around some antique shops, practically every piece that you see that is unattractive porcelain, slightly ugly, they say Minguo da, implying this period, from the beginning of the 20th century until the time when the Great Revolution came. And Mao Zedong won, and since 1949 the new history of China began. Here there are workpieces of the age of Minguo. They apparently evolved very much comparing to the ware of the Qin dynasty. It's quite subtle white porcelain, and the sculptures are of high quality. After the advent of communism in 1951, the first factories were founded. Of course, the beginning was hard. It was a powerful centre that produced porcelain. But obviously everything related to culture and art was not possible in the first years of the government Communist Party. After the reforms of Deng Xiaoping, all this certainly blossomed with thousands of flowers, it's written here, as the advertising poster. And they started manufacturing the products of totally different order that we'll see now. Here it's clear what Dehua turned into now, what this great town became. These are the first famous vases with flowers and very subtle porcelain work. The sculptures of flowers fully made by hands which look fresh. Here there are even souvenir gifts. They are likely to make souvenirs for Holland that are sold all over Amsterdam. As they say, the majority of them are made not in Holland. The multiple cats, dogs, pots and so on, diverse souvenirs. Of course the statue of Guanyin as well, the well-known sculpture of white porcelain. The tureens, plates, tea sets of different kinds and vases. They all tried to squeeze all this diversity in this room. But actually, if we try to arrange all this stuff and squeeze it in some museum, I believe that it would be impossible. Because for now there are about 800 factories in Dehua. According to different sources, the number of factories even goes up to 1,000, where tens of thousands of people are working. The largest ceramic centre not only of China but the whole world. And they produce porcelain of just everything. Surely there are other centres as well, such as Chaozong, for example, where they manufacture bulk ceramics, including various plumbing equipment, and so on. A kind of junction of high art and mass production. That's Dehua. And in the last hall of the museum is not that big, although it's quite interesting for me. There are the workpieces of the contemporary artists. Last time I was here they were completely different, which is neither bad nor good, because I remember several works which I'd like to show you today. Here there are in fact the most merited masters and their masterpieces, produced at the first porcelain factory and by the independent artisans. Because until the last decades, working masters were united as a rule by one large-scale factory. For instance, Yixing Factory No. 1 and so on. It's the same here in Dehua. It's written the first porcelain factory. Afterwards, the masters started working independently, especially those who were dedicated. They established their own schools, micro-institutes, and the modern stage of history began. This hall is in fact another argument that everything that is ancient is of course superb and wonderful. It all deserves some kind of historical honouring and so on. But regarding the delicacy of the work, the cross-technical exchange, when the porcelain masters, potters can visit any countries, any cities, to study, to share expertise, to get all the benefits of state-of-the-art technologies in firing and glazing, we can see that present-day sculptures and present-day ware, innovative art objects made of porcelain, they are higher, of course, by all the criteria than more ancient art. The evolution is visible in terms of the quality of the work, the delicacy of the work, and the pursuit of antique porcelain. Porcelain of the beginning of the 20th century, Minguo, period of Republic of China, and to the more old porcelain of the dynasties Qin, Ming, and so on. It makes little sense because the contemporary artisans make better works. They really produce more qualitative pieces that you wish to plunge into, to scrutinize. You see how good the details are elaborated. In the case of sculpture, how excellent the face is. Guanyin with 1,000 arms. Certainly it doesn't have 1,000 arms, but it has 3 sides. It's a very subtle sculpture. How perfectly everything is. The work, as I understand, took 20 years, and there are artisans who manufacture even more elaborate pieces. The progress is obvious, and it's clear how the art evolved from the ancient stage. That's all. I hope you enjoyed my virtual excursion in the Porcelain Museum of Dehua. Subscribe to the channel for more like this. We have a lot of interesting times ahead. Bye bye everybody.